In the previous lecture, talked about the Stefferson-Maxwell Paradox and the Kirov-Argal Paradox in the video before that. And it's just a sort of a temporary part or lectures on a new course called Femboy theory, which is just integrating Femboy's and set theory. The Stefferson-Maxwell Paradox was actually very controversial because when I presented it to some queer Discord servers, I was new. I was branded as a transphobic, and that it was very rude. And honestly, yes, it was very rude. The way I worded it was very bad. And yeah, but just to clarify things, I am not transphobic. I love the trans people. I love the entire queer community, alright? So please don't take any of my theorems, paradoxes, or theories as an attack, alright? I just wish to demonstrate the dangers, not only the dangers, but the wonders of my axiomatic system, which is based on ZFC. And since it's based on ZFC, it's bound to have paradoxes like Banach-Tarski, which is negative. But to atone for my sin, I don't want to say sin, but right, like atone for my mistakes, and to atone for the negativity for this paradox, today I will present you guys with three positive theorems that are derived from this theorem. And these three theorems will be Theorem 5.1, the Stevensson-Grayson Theorem, Theorem 5.2, which is the general Stevensson-Grayson Theorem, Theorem 5.3, Hilbert's Femboy, and the last one, actually it's 4, Theorem 5.4, the Infinite Gay Theorem. So you guys can already get a sense for this. I'm basically going to prove that if you're a gay person, you're gayer than you think that you are. So yeah, let's begin by discussing the Stevensson-Grayson Theorem. It's derived, the reason why I'm naming it 5.1, 5.2 is because it's derived from the Stefferson-Maxwell Paradox. And so yeah, I'm actually building the theory from the ground up by treating these sets as actual people and stuff like that. So alright, Theorem 5.1. Okay, start one. Theorem 5.1. Let H be the homosexual set. The homo set. It can be a subset of any set that we know. It can be a subset of F. It can be a subset of a human set H, or it could be a subset of a person P, which I'll discuss in depth in a separate video. If H is bounded with a set containing two copies of itself, so let's name this set N, such that N is equal to H and H, or H and H squared. If we envision H as an action, we can rephrase the second one, or the copy, as H squared. Alright, so let's say that this N and this H are non-empty sets. Then we can say, via the Banach-Schroeder-Bernstein theorem, that H is equidecomposable use a black one. H is equidecomposable with two copies of itself. There. And the proof of this theorem lies within the Banach-Schroeder-Bernstein theorem. Alright. So using the Banach-Schroeder-Bernstein theorem, so use the Banach-Schroeder-Bernstein theorem. Banach-Schroeder-Bernstein theorem. So if you use it, let alpha be an open set. Be an open set that's a subset of N. well, I'm not going to say proper subset, it can compose the entirety of N. So let alpha be an open set in N. We already know N to be the set that contains two copies of H, which is the homo set. By the Banach-Tarski paradox and the Banach-Schroeder-Bernstein theorem, alpha is equidecomposable with two copies of itself, or a finite copy of itself. With finite copies of itself. And what we want to do with these finite copies of alpha is that we position them inside H. So we position these subsets or these copies of H, of alpha in H, so that these copies of alpha compose H, and since the copies of alpha compose H, and that these copies are equivalent to to alpha, which is an open set in N, we can say through logic that H is equidecomposable with N, because alpha composes H, and alpha is an open set in N which can contain the two copies of H. So therefore, we can say that H is equidecomposable with N, and thus two copies of itself. To say that H is equidecomposable with N, which is defined to be 2H, or two copies of H, and so formally speaking, H becomes the disjoint union. H becomes the disjoint union of alpha and its copies. So H becomes alpha union alpha 1 union alpha n. So it becomes a disjoint union of that and is thus equal to n. And so let's define any set H that contains the homosexual set small h to be a gay set. So if we have H as a subset of capital H is the gay set. So capital H is the gay set. And we can say that this gay set, or the person that has H, is twice the gay. So he's gayer than he thinks he is. And now it's a simple thing if we extend this H, or this NH, or these n copies of H to be something that's not just 2, or if we generalize it into n copies of H, or n copies of alpha, or just n copies of H or its duplicate, we can derive the next theorem. So if we generalize it, if we generalize this theorem, which is the Stefferson-Grayson theorem, we have the general Stefferson-Grayson theorem. Theorem 5.2. H, the homosexual set. So let's assume the previous stipulations we had from the previous theorem. Let's assume the previous stipulations. H is equidecomposable with n copies of itself. And this is a different thing. We're more or less using the proof of the Stefferson. We're more or less using the proof of the Stefferson-Maxwell Paradox. So I suggest you watch the previous video. It's basically just us just saying that F is the set that contains the n copies of H. Or if we have H and then we have some other set n, this time it's n copies of H. So using the previous proof of the previous lecture, or I mean of the previous theorem, we can say that H is equidecomposed with n copies of itself. It's just using induction. We're just using induction to generalize the previous theorem. And so, yeah. Just follow through the copying procedure from the previous proof to get that H is equidecomposed with n. And so, if we... Alright, let's discuss about Hilbert's Femboy. So let's assume that the n copies, or the n here that dictates the copies of H approaches infinity. Then we can say that the person or the set that H is a part of is infinitely gay. And so let's assume that H is a part of the Femboy set. I already discussed in the Argyle paradox that F is independent of the definition of H, but here let's assume that F is in need of H. Let's say that H is a subset of F, or the Femboy set. Then let H be a subset of F, and let n approach infinity. Then F is infinitely gay. So the Femboy is infinitely gay. And so we call this Femboy Hilbert's Femboy, named after Hilbert's paradox of the Grand Hotel and Femboy, because the Femboy is infinitely gay. We will never run out of gayness and such. The proof of this is just in the previous one, except this time we have an arbitrary number of n, or we let n approach infinity, or the copies of H approach infinity. And to generalize this theorem, we just need to say that any set that contains n and H is infinitely gay. So if we generalize this, we get theorem 5.4, which is the infinite gay theorem. So the gay set H is a subset of capital H is infinitely gay. Or we can assign this theorem to any arbitrary set A that describes a person. So a person. I'll discuss a person, but I'll be discussing a person what person is in a different video. But I'll just give a brief summary. A person is basically a set that contains information regarding a certain individual. So if we have A to be composed of the age, the gender, the sexual orientation, or the maybe the employment, nationality of a person, then A is characterized to be a person. So that's one of the important things that we're gonna build up this theory and make it stronger and more in concordance to reality. So the proof of theorem 5.4 is just dependent on the previous theorems. The proofs of these theorems are basically one and the same, but we've just switched up some things here and there to derive these theorems. So in atonement for the Stefferson-Maxwell Paradox, here's these 4 theorems that are rather very positive, including my favorite one, Hilbert's Femboy.